I'll call to order the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education on Monday, March 12th, 2018. We're at the Oregon High School Innovations Center. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney? Present. Ms. Odorico? Here. Ms. Flanagan? Here. Mr. Raymond?
Here.
Mr. Kraus?
Yo.
Mr. LeBrun? Mr. Zott?
Present. Board has a quorum. I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin Open Meetings Law, and those proofs of postings will be with Ms. Wick if anyone wants to inspect them. Our agenda tonight includes our standard items in terms of action. We have one item from policy, a review of capital maintenance projects for 2018-19, renewal of our girls hockey co-op contract. We're going to do a work session on our growth and population task force again this evening and receive a 5-year budget plan from Andy. And we might do that before, Andy, the discussion items, because it dovetails nicely into that. I think if that's okay with everyone, we'll just have Andy's report before we actually do the work session, which we'll do out here. And then the board will be moving into closed session to finalize the superintendent evaluation this evening. We will not be returning to open session at the close of our closed session. So I'll need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
I move to approve the agenda as posted with the exception of moving Andy's part before E2 work session.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. Raymond with the second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Under item A of the agenda, consent calendar. Is there any item that any board member wishes to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, I need a motion to approve those items. Ms. Flanagan with the motion, a second. Ms. Feeney with the second. I'll note that we have 2 donations to accept this evening. One is from the Oregon Educational Foundation in the amount of $675 to the OHS Arts Department, and the Oregon Rotary Club with about $450 to the OMS Forest Project, and we thank them for their generous donations to our district. We have a retirement this evening that we are going to be asked to approve. Mr. Rickley has indicated that he's retiring at the end of the year. Is Dan here? Dan is not here because we were going to try to persuade him. Yeah, because we would try to talk him out of it. Anybody who knows and has worked with Dan realizes the significance and importance he is to our district and the contributions he's made here for the last 10 years. He's certainly deserving of his retirement, but we're going to miss him greatly and the leadership that he provides. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Ms. Odorico?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond? Yes. Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Zott?
Yes, motion carries 7-0 for the items on the consent calendar. Moving to item B. 6-0. Sorry. Thank you. Communication from the public. Board Policy 180.04 establishes the opportunity for anyone from the district to address the board. Ms. Wick, is anyone registered?
No.
Anyone want to speak to the board this evening? Seeing none, we'll move then to information item C, OEA report. Anything? Okay, Laura, thanks. Student report. Hi, Ellen. You've got a 2-parter tonight. Ellen's got a report for us, and then she's got to weigh in on our workshop time. So go ahead.
Okay, so some spring sports are starting. The high school parent-teacher conferences are this week. There was spring fling or spring dance for the high school was last Friday, and around 300 students attended, so we're really happy about that. DECA went to state, and at state 2 students medaled and 9 qualified for ICDC, which is nationals, or internationals. And we have a new Wisconsin statewide DECA president from our high school, a junior, Anna Mahowski. Mock trial competed at the state semifinals tournament on March 9th and 10th, and they finished 11th overall. This month, the German exchange students are coming. They're arriving March 22nd, and they'll be here for about a month, and there's around 25 students that we'll be welcoming at the high school. And we have a junior OHS student and violinist, Isabel Cryer, and she's a finalist in the Madison Symphony Orchestra's Young Artist Competition, the Final Forte. This is the third and final round of a statewide competition that began with almost 40 young musicians. She advanced through the first 2 rounds, and the last round she'll be playing live with the Madison Symphony Orchestra. The concert is free and open to the public, and so OHS is sending a fan bus, and she, at the concert, she will also be playing a 10-minute solo. It's this Wednesday, March 14th at 6:45 p.m. at the Overture Center. So if you're interested, you can join them on the fan bus. And I think that's all.
That's a really big deal. And it'll be broadcast live on Wisconsin Public Radio, I think, as well, if you want to listen to it. I remember driving back when Greg Riss from our high school was playing, and he won. But I was somewhere between Juneau, Wisconsin, and Columbus listening to him. Yeah, that's a really big deal. So terrific. Thanks for reporting on that, and we'll hear from you later on. And we approved as part of our consent calendar the German field trip for students from Oregon High School are going to take a trip over to Germany to our sister school over there. So that's really cool. Sehr gut. All right. That takes us to community recognition, something Brian and I have talked about for a couple of years is an opportunity to thank folks in the community who spend a lot of background time of their own improving our district. And so we thought we would move that forward now because it's a couple of folks have spent a lot of time in the last couple of years on behalf of our district. So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you or Andy first.
I'll go ahead and start. So this evening I wanted to talk a little bit about a program that we started back in 2001. That program is kind of a unique program. We're not the only one in the state that does it, but we build a home construction project every year, a home basically every year that our students have made. And this year we're in, I think, our 17th year. We've built 16 homes. 1 year we took off when the economy wasn't so good. But in that time, and actually next week, we will have purchased 19 different properties and after next week and sold 15 of them, hopefully 16 this summer. And I haven't been able to do that by myself. So when we started this project back, we were talking about it in February 2001, I was asking Mr. Zock, I'm like, I think I need some legal help on how to do this. And Mr. Zock gave me the name of a person, and the person's name is Nanette Carls. And so Nanette has been with me as we've worked through the construction projects all these years and all those different homes. Usually it's been a very smooth process, but occasionally we hit a little hiccup where somebody has to back out of a home or something like that. And Nanette is always the person that finds a way to keep moving the project forward and keeping the district's interest in the first in good position so that we don't have any losses or anything or any legal problems. So as I was reflecting back on this, and we've been talking about community members who have helped the district, Nanette's name jumped into my head, and I really felt like we needed to recognize her for all her efforts for all these different years. So with that said, I'd like to bring Nanette up, and we have a little gift for you. So this is a Making a Difference Award, and this is an award that we give people that contribute to the school district. Usually they've been staff members, but this is kind of the first time that we've given a community member this award. rightfully so, to somebody very deserving.
Thank you very much.
I forgot to mention what's on the screen is our first house. This was a house on Rustic Vineyards, so we've come a long ways. First house sold for, I think, in the 180s. Last year's house sold for over $425,000. So things have changed a little bit, but the net service to the district has been steadfast during that entire time. So thank you.
The next individual we're going to recognize this evening, I know many of you know as well. He has been a longtime teacher in the Oregon School District, and Al is retired now. His name is Al Keel. Al, I have to say some really nice things about you before I call you up. Al, being a technology educator, Al was very interested in school construction and school facilities, and he stops by my office every once in a while to give me some advice and to chat about what's going on in the school. And he said, I would love to get a hard hat and one of these devices so I can get into the school and just observe, watch, do a little monitoring. And the thing that impressed me most, he said, I want to learn a little bit more about construction. He spent his entire life in technology education, so he will know more about instruction or more about construction than most individuals. And I didn't realize it at the time, but Al was also going to take a couple of pictures. He probably knows to the exact number, the number of photos that he has taken. I know it's literally in the thousands, and I had an opportunity to meet a couple of his neighbors along the way. And one of his neighbors was very instrumental in operating. Do you remember that big red crane we had parked in the middle of the gymnasium? One day I got a great lesson from him on the crane, and he and Al provided me with periodic updates on all of the school sites. Al even provided us with a few canvas art shots of photos that he took, and I think everyone can see this one. This is one of the photos of the main entrance area, or what I'd call the north entrance in the Oregon School District, and there's a little compare-contrast. We loved it before. We love it a little better now, a little more now, with the beautiful entrance that we have. I always felt through this project we had someone that truly loved the Oregon School District and was always checking on things. And I know he would stop by and visit with Andy as well, sometimes giving us advice, sometimes asking questions about why are the contractors doing this. And it was a lot of fun over that 2-year period to see a community member, and especially one of our own, a retired teacher, so engaged in our projects. And when Steve and I talked about sort of a Friends of Education, a big contribution to the district, Al certainly came to mind, and everyone knows Al in the district. I think he really liked going and seeing the kids out at Brooklyn Elementary School, and they got a big kick out of him with his little walking cane. He always has a creative walking cane. So Al, would you please come forward? We want to recognize you as a friend of the Oregon School District. I don't know if you heard that, but Al said almost 9,000 photos. It was a long time in the dark room. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanette and Al, for your service to the district. We've got a construction class that has been well served and met great educational goals. And Al, we've got an amazing photo journal of the progress of our construction that we've got to get into a more condensed form, and that'll be our challenge to show the progress of it. I'd like to see with the red crane watching those walls go up, you can do kind of a video loop of that. That'd be pretty cool. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to Section D, action items from policy. We have course options, youth options, and I think this is to us because of change in state law. So I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the policy committee, Krista Flanagan.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, this is changes to state statute. So what's happening is we're asking you to delete policy 325, and it has to do with our students taking courses at other institutions for credit. And so we're not ready to come back to you with the new policy that's going to address the new state laws, but we'd like you to delete this, and this would be effective June 30th, 2018. So we're just getting rid of this policy, and we'll bring something back to you next board meeting, so we have plenty of time to discuss it before it takes effect. So that is a recommendation from Policy Committee to delete Policy 325.
Okay, motion from the policy committee to delete 325 effective June 30th. Anybody have any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll since the policy change?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Ms. Oderico? Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Zock?
Yes. We have deleted a policy.
And, Mr. President, just for the record, that would be midnight of June 30th. So that's the law expires at that point.
Thanks, Dean. Next item on the agenda is 2018-2019 capital maintenance projects, a report from Andy on how he is going to be allocating the budget numbers for these projects next year. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The report's fairly small this year. We have some fairly large projects, but I'll go through them with a couple slides so that you can visually kind of see what the plan is. We'll start, as soon as the slide show starts here, with Brooklyn Elementary. We have a couple different things happening there. The board was nice enough to offer kind of a matching grant for playground equipment. We have put some drainage improvements in place at Brooklyn, but with the new playground, we really felt like it was time to address the majority of, or the remaining portions of those. So you can see on the left side of this presentation here, a puddle that we're going to try to get rid of so that the kids don't get wet or have slips and falls over there in the playground area. So that's one project to do the site prep for that. And then the Brooklyn parent-teacher organization is contributing some significant dollars to put in a new playground in there. So we'll be getting the site ready and putting that in. I also like to recognize that Findorf will be helping us do some of that work as a donation to the district. So we're working with them cooperatively to do that. One of the things that you may notice, and it's been on our list for years, so this year we thought it would be the time to do that, to fix it, is some of the doors at Brooklyn have been delaminating and creating some problems. With a focus on security and just maintenance, we felt like this year would be the first year, or would be the year to go ahead and replace those doors. So we have about $26,000 in doors in a certain hallway that are going to be replaced, kind of on the east side of the school. And then lastly, over at Brooklyn, we have a new fire alarm system next to an old fire alarm system, and we are planning to get rid of the older fire alarm system and make it all addressable, which simply means that the system could recognize each device, and it's kind of all set up to make that next step with all the work that we did these last couple of years. But this is just basically replacing the older fire alarm system with a newer addressable system that talks to the new addressable component that's already in place. So those three projects are right around $100,000 at Brooklyn that we're looking to do. Next year is our year where we actually shut down the pool for a couple weeks, And so one of the things that we do when we do that is we empty the pool, and that's the time to kind of fix things. This is just normal maintenance type stuff, but we will need to grind and regel the pool shell. That's I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's a certain type of liner that we put in a number of years ago. It has like a 25-year warranty, but you have to do maintenance on it. So we'll be doing that in March or April of next year. We have the face classroom at the high school is kind of original for the most part to the building, and so we're going to be looking to upgrade that. I worked with Bray to kind of come up with a design that makes the best sense for that area, and we'll have 6 different kitchens and a demonstration area in the middle of the classroom, and so we're looking to do that and bring that up to where it needs to be. A good component of that is the electrical. We do pop breakers here and there, and so we'll be bringing in a new electrical service into that area of the building for the appliances that need to be plugged into that. So this is a project that you all had a part in noticing a few months ago. And it's combined with something else that really, this is the time to do it, so to speak. The left-hand side of the presentation here shows the breaker to the electrical area downstairs, which runs the entire building. We had a just bizarre situation where that breaker kind of tripped a little bit, not entirely, and it sent the building into a frenzy of what could only be described as some type of a light show that went on during a board meeting. So we found out that this breaker is, kind of at the end of its life. And unfortunately, though, it takes a couple days potentially to replace the breaker, and this is a very busy building. In addition, one of the things that on the back side of the building, kind of on the east side of the building, right behind the football field, that is a little unsightly, is these 2 power poles. That's how the building is powered currently, and we are looking to get remove those. For just for the sightliness of them, but also for kind of power security to the building. Obviously, if those poles were to come down or something were to happen to them, we would be out of power for a significant amount of time. So we are looking to redo this, kind of go from what's called a primary service to a secondary service, and make those poles basically go away. So we'll be working on those 2 things. We combine those 2 because we're going to have an outage, and we are actually looking to bring in a large generator that will power the building for the possible 2 days that the electrical service would be done. So hence, those were both kind of connected, and we put them into about a $100,000 project. The next one is actually an energy savings project. We have a number of air handlers. It's only for about $12,000 that we'll be putting what's called frequency drives, variable frequency drives on some air handlers to make them more efficient. So that's something. And then lastly, on the bottom, you don't have a picture of it, but we have some roof drains in the field house. We did replace a couple of them last year. A couple more started to create problems for us. With the new gym floor in there, that wood floor, we really want to protect that and make sure that is solid, so we'll be replacing those roof drains with a newer style. They are original. The ones that we're replacing are original to the building. Again, with focus on safety, we are looking to, I'm jumping to the left side here. This is what's called an IP clock. You'll see 2 of them actually in this room in the corners. These clocks are a little bit different than the ones that are in the corners of this room in that, and it's not shown on here, but they have strobe lights built into them. And the idea is that we're putting these in locations where they're very noisy areas where our students and staff might not be able to hear an announcement unless there was some type of visual indicator. So because it's so important to communicate with staff and students in situations, we're looking to replace these in areas that are very loud. So, for instance, in commons areas and music areas. We actually did this as a pilot project for Rome Corners during the winter break, and folks are very appreciative of that. I think we have that project up and running at this point in time. So that's one of the projects. And then very boring projects, but costly. This is the 9th year of our project with when we replaced the middle school majority of the roof, except for the standing seam metal roofs. Were all replaced about 9 years ago, and so this is a zero interest debt payment that we have for the middle school that we entered into when there was the economy had gone down, and there was some basically zero interest money that the federal government was providing us, so we participated in that. And then the debt service payment for J.C. Park East. And then we are left with about a $19,000 contingency in case any of these projects need a little bit of extra money just as we go through. So if you added all that up, you'd get to right around $600,000, which is in your packet. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Just for curiosity, how many doors do we get for $26,000?
Ooh, is that on that sheet? Off the top of my head, I want to say 8, but is Carrie here by any chance? Carrie, any idea how many in that hallway? You know the hallway I'm talking about, right? Yeah, I'd guess somewhere between 8 and 10, because there are some smaller rooms in that area. Okay. So we'll go with 8. That sounds like a good middle ground. They are non-standard size doors, so they're custom, unfortunately.
So you had mentioned that the old doors were looking shabby and maybe not as secure as they might be. Are these doors? Do these doors offer some security?
Yeah, security as well as aesthetics. I think both of those things are. As Carrie just mentioned, they're kind of warped, and so they're not going to shut real well and hollow, right?
So do you know specifically what type of security these doors might offer? Or are they just heavier, or are there special locks on them? Are there windows in them?
We would probably have the typical side light windows that we put in most of our doors. That's also for security purposes, but they would be more solid core doors rather than these are kind of like hollow wood doors that you would find in maybe a residential house. We're going to move to more of a solid core door that are typical for schools and commercial projects.
Thanks.
You bet.
Regarding the zone fire alarms, are those alarms able to be used for anything besides fire? Are they designed to be used for anything besides fire?
So the fire alarms, no, that is specific to the fire alarm system. The IP program or the IP clocks can be used for multiple different ways to communicate with people, but the fire alarm system is specific to that. And we do have some other fire alarm systems that we're going to have to replace. They're kind of end of life that will be coming up in the next couple of years. But this one we've been told is getting close. We were actually with the fire department in Brooklyn last week, and when we mentioned that we were going to replace this, they were very appreciative of that.
I just wanted to mention something that came to mind that you had said in a tour that we had. I believe it was in the RCI, or it could have been the middle school, some years before we had done the most recent upgrades, that since the 1950s or so, there's only been perhaps 1 or 2 deaths from fire by school children. And that's in 50, 60 years. And in that time, we've had hundreds of deaths from other unfortunate emergencies, including the ones that hit the newspapers every so often, very too common. So I just want to say that it's important to have fire safety, but we also need to keep in mind that the dangers from fire is actually very low compared to other very real dangers. And I don't want to throw up there's an emergency flag here, because there's not. We've got very secure schools, especially since our referendum. But I'm glad to see that we're not putting all of our security money to the fire system, and we're also upgrading our other security.
Yep.
That's all.
Anyone else, Barb?
I'm just wondering about the Brooklyn playground. Is the equipment already funded through the PTO, or is there more money going to be needed?
So the amount of money that the board allocated, we've allocated a portion of that, and then the PTO has raised the other portion of it. It's kind of a 50-50 type of arrangement. I think the PTO might have gone slightly above the 50% to get a couple extra things, though.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve the allocation as presented by Andy.
Hang on a sec. I have another question if I could.
Okay.
Regarding the J.C. Park East debt service payment, how many of those do we have left?
This is the last one.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have a motion to approve the allocation as presented by Andy?
I move to approve the allocation as presented.
Mr. Kraus with the motion, is there a second? Mr. Raymond with the second to the motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Zock?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. That takes us to item D3, which is the Girls Hockey Cooperative Contract. This is for 2018-2020. Mr. Carr, this is just a renewal from the WIA, what we... You want to come up and to the mic and put that before the board? Thanks.
Yep.
So this is the 6603 that combines Stoughton, Monona Grove, McFarland, Evansville, Oregon, and Deerfield hockey teams as a co-op. One thing that is different than before, that is a note, is we got together as athletic directors and reevaluated this co-op agreement because this co-op agreement's about 10 years old. And in the previous agreements, the cost of the program was totally paid for by the girls themselves. So the difference that we have made is that each district will contribute from their budget a amount of $655 per skater towards the overall cost, and that is in line with all of our boys programs. So we're trying to fund this girls co-op in the same manner that we fund our individual boys programs.
The change is bringing us in the girls area in compliance with what we're doing, or in line with what we're doing with the boys program?
Correct.
Okay. Good. Does anybody have any questions of Mike regarding this? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the 660301 girls hockey co-op contract for 2018-2020 as presented. And Mike, I'm assuming this got approved by the WIAA and the local area directors?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there a motion? Ms. Flanagan with the motion, is there a second? Ms. Feeney with the second. Any further discussion? Dan?
Andy, is this part of our budget, or how's this fitting in?
The way we allocate funds for athletics is it's a per student allocation for every student that's in a building. So that allocation then goes to Mr. Carr, and then Mr. Carr works within his budget to allocate funds. So yes, but I don't specifically do anything with this. It just Mr. Carr allocates from within his budget.
This would be new to my budget.
So you've got the funds for this, or is this something more that you're asking for next year?
I think I can find the funding for this year, this next year. It might be something that Andy and I can talk about in the future.
I think it's a great idea. It only makes sense to make the girls program equal in funding from the school district with the boys program. I just want to make sure that we've got the money for it.
Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico? Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Zock?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Thanks. We have an approved contract, Mike. Great. We're going to jump down to item F, informational items. Well, actually, let's go to discussion items, committee reports E1. Anything else from policy this evening? Okay. Jeff, anything from visioning?
Vision Steering Committee has not met since the last full board meeting, and the March meeting has been canceled.
And we're doing a lot of work on visioning with our growth task force, so kind of it's at the board level right now as opposed to committee. Now let's move, we'll skip down to item F1, 5-year budget plan, and then we'll work with that and back into our work session on student growth. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me get to this agenda item here quick. There we go. Every year, typically in the spring, the Board of Education asks me to kind of just do a look forward into what our budget may be as best I can predict into the future. And so we look at 5 years. What we typically have actually done, though, rather than trying to take all the assumptions that go into a budget, is we look at basically our enrollment growth. Enrollment growth in the state of Wisconsin is very indicative of the health of a school district. Growth is good in that decline is problematic in the state of Wisconsin because basically every student that is added to the district you get a full allocation for, even though the costs are marginal to educate that additional student. That works in the reverse if you're declining. So basically what we try to do is, if we're going to look that far out rather than getting excited about how things play out, it's just basically a kind of a 50,000 foot view of where we're headed and how things look. So this year we had the unique opportunity to use projections that are above and beyond what I could obviously produce by using Mr. Roffer's report. And so we took Mr. Roffer's report and put it into the report and combined it with open enrollment data based on what we've seen in the past and on what the Board of Education approved in January and February for open enrollment spots. I'm just going to kind of jump to the back of the report, which is where all the bigger numbers are. But you can kind of see as we go through this, we're combining the information. And what we started to look at is we started to look at two different scenarios. The main component was that Mr. Roffers kind of predicts information out to 2022-23. He gives us kind of a midpoint of where he anticipates that we're going to be. And so we have a lot of growth between that period of time. Maybe if I should back up to what he showed. On this sheet here, you can see that by 2020, 2021, Mr. Roffers is projecting about 43 students from last January 2017's number of 3755. Neither of those numbers include open enrollment, so we have to add those. These are just residents. So you see that that's a fairly significant increase, not 1,000 students, but not that far off. We're probably talking about 600-700 students. So what we did is we ran two different scenarios. Those scenarios included increasing the growth. When we say 10%, we're saying 10% of that growth that I showed you before of about 600 or 700 students in that first year, which is next year, 18-19, and then going to 45, 45, 2020 after that. The 45, the 10, 45, 45 gets us to the number, the mid-year number that Mr. Roffers was talking about. And so that's kind of a slower growth model. A faster growth model would have been taking it 15%, 40%, and 45%. So we wanted to run those two and kind of see where we were headed. And you can see those numbers on this page going from next year 3810 to 3852. So not a huge difference, but what does that mean from a money perspective? And then you see basically us kind of exponentially ramping up with growth after that year. Because of the large increase in 45. We based that on basically a lot of it was on the, and I just forgot the name of the development. It starts with a T. Terravesa property. We do think that it'll probably take a good part of this next year to get the infrastructure in and homes starting to build. But we think that after this year, the 18-19 school year, we'll probably start seeing significant number of students coming from that area. So we will move that down to what does that mean financially. Here's the open enrollment that we combine with that information. You have to keep in mind with revenue limits, there is a 3-year averaging that happens. And so even though we're adding students, the impact is slow because it takes a little bit of time for that 3-year average to come up. And so we get into scenario 1, which is the 10% growth for next year. And basically you can see that that's here. We're looking at about $1.6 million in additional funds. And then we start increasing fairly significantly as that 3-year average starts kicking in, where we approach 2 million, and then we approach almost 3 million the 3rd year out.
And Andy, those are not cumulative numbers, but those are additional over the preceding year.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yep. Fairly significant amount of money that's going to be added. Not necessarily this next year because we need the additional students. And then here's the other scenario, which is a little bit faster at 15% this next year, 40, 45. And then the last page on here, we kind of look at those 2 different scenarios and compare them. So this is the last page of the report, which basically shows, we're anticipating somewhere between $1.59 million in additional funds this next year and $1.75 million. So quite an amount of growth that we'll be looking at. I think the 10% number is realistic. It's a slightly above what we saw this last year, but we did see growth throughout the year. So I think it's a realistic number. Much more than 15%, we're not seeing it right now, but perhaps that could happen. So I've kind of got a window of about $200,000 or so that I think will fall somewhere in there this next year. What's interesting is with that amount of growth, it might not happen in the summer. So it'll be interesting to see that type of growth and how that comes. Hopefully most people will want to move in the summer so get a fresh start in their school year, but there's no promises. So it'll be interesting to see and manage this amount of growth. It might require us to kind of think a little bit differently about approving things necessarily before people show up. Just so that we have the structures in place. Because you know this from going through the years that we have. Sometimes when you have growth that's not anticipated, it's difficult to manage that if the structures aren't in place right from the beginning of the school year. It can be done, but it's not as clean cut as we would like it to be. So, any questions?
One of the reasons I wanted to jump this ahead of the Growth Task Force report is because as part of our consideration of that report and the potential to build new buildings, we're also going to have an operational component to that with costs because of growth. And so, while it looks like we've got a lot of money to play with here, and using that phrase lightly, in reality, we're going to have additional personnel to hire, and so I would think a large share of that's going to go into that. So,
yeah, one of the discussions that we've had preliminarily from a staff level is there especially when you get into a new building, there's a lot of fixed costs. At what level do those fixed costs do you want to use as an override? You might have to do some because we might not have enough to fund all of it, but maybe there's a portion of it. But there's also a component of additional sections that you're going to be dealing with the new students. And that's difficult because, as I said, there's this 3-year averaging that happens. And so the money doesn't always happen when you need the new staff. And so until you get into that 3-year average and it's rolling, the first couple of years can actually be kind of difficult to deal with just the marginal cost of the additional staff that you need to have as teachers.
that's really a pretty ringtone, though, too. It's really good. And so that's a data point for board members as we move forward and consider the operational side of whatever we do building-wise. This number will become important, and it will be worth our consideration as we look at the 18-19 budget to look at that budget not only in the context of 18-19, but allocating those dollars with an eye toward what's going to happen in the future. So, and Brian's going to have some numbers for us in terms of potential building size for the various options given growth so that we can start looking at working toward what we're going to need for staffing in those buildings. And that would be relevant toward the operational budget side of things as well. But given that background, does any board member have any questions of Andy regarding this 5-year report? Dan?
So, along with what Steve was saying, do you have an estimate at how many additional staff, not including the building maintenance and operations, but for the number of students that would be increased, say, just in the 18-19 school year, which is, how many do we estimate?
I think the increase is around 100 students or so, just slightly under that, it looks like. This last year, we were up about 66 students, I think, from third Friday to third Friday. We were up close to 100 from last January to this January. So the growth seems to be starting to pick up a little bit. So yeah, we're looking somewhere between, I'm looking at this page here that's up on the screen, going from September of 2017 to 3724 to 3810, so just about 90 students. That's the 10% growth, or we could be going from to about 120 or 130 students above that. Do I have specific estimates on how many staff members? No, I think we are starting that process with the principals to identify kind of those classes that are tight, because realize that a number of those students are already in our numbers, and then trying to project where we might need some flexibility or additional capacity based on what we think will move in during the summer. So we'll be working on that over the next couple weeks.
And then you'll see when Brian gets to his report in the handouts, you'll see some information that would be relevant to your question. We're starting to break out under each of the options that's identified in the report where students would be and what would that look toward building size. And from that number, we can continue to work on then what's staffing looking at in those buildings. And then we take the next step and how much would that cost. And then the number that Andy's got here would be relevant to us to look at as how we're going to fund that additional staffing. Krista.
Right, exactly. I'm sorry. If I could just follow up. Yeah, my concern is just that, like you said, we'll have, it looks like extra money. At least in the 3-year rollout, as it goes on, we'll be getting extra money. And how much of this is going to be able to be used to pay off debt, and how much are we going to have to go out and ask for if we do have to ask for some in order to pay off debt to build buildings?
Yeah, I haven't projected anything to pay off debt at this point in time. I guess that would be something the board could consider.
Thanks.
Any more, Dan?
No.
Okay, Krista.
Just one comment in terms of when we talk about staff, I just want to make sure that we, with our language, don't just say teachers, but we also need to talk about paras and counselors and student services and coaches. So just kind of a board thing in terms of what we mean when we say staff.
Any other questions of Andy regarding the report? Okay, thanks, Andy. That's really good, bringing in the Roffler stuff and then driving the numbers. That's really useful to us for our future use with respect to the growth stuff. That takes us then directly into our discussion on student growth and population. Brian, how about we let Ellen go first with her presentation, and then you've got some handouts. You can just stay there and take that mic, and if Andy would get your report up. So Ellen's done some work with the high school students, right? And
Yes.
getting some feedback for our consideration.
Yes.
So the floor is yours.
All right. So, so what I did was Courtney Orderico presented the Growth Task Force presentation to all of Student Council a few weeks ago. We allowed the students to ask questions and give feedback. I collected all of their feedback and I condensed it into one document. which I was able to go over with Dr. Bergstrom and just kind of get an overall consensus and some takeaways. So the three main takeaways I got were that students all wanted to come together prior to high school, maturity gap depending on schools and the age ranges of different grades combining, and just kind of the little things. A lot of students just kind of thought deeper about when they were at those schools and what it was like, and yeah, you'll see more. So the first one was students coming together prior to high school. Over the half of the students expressed they did not want to come together at high school, that they wanted to come together prior to, even if that meant sacrificing having a larger middle school versus keeping the small town feel. They mentioned a lot of things more about on the social aspect, where a lot of students make their friendships in middle school, and which allows for an easier transition from middle school to high school, which is not something we necessarily think about until you talk to the students. I didn't actually really think about it initially until they brought it up, and majority of my friends that I've made in middle school are my friends that I still have in high school, so it's nice to have a group of people or friends coming into high school where there is a bigger amount of people, but not to say that you can not make friendships in high school. The next thing was the maturity gap, accommodating for a variety of ages in one school. So this is more in regards to the 5 through 6, or the K through 6 schools, having the proper equipment or playground or sports areas, a gymnasium, all of that being able to accommodate for various age ranges, and then the personal experience for each student. So a student actually came up and talked to me in the grade below, and she came from, I think she said Iowa, and she was in a K through 6 school, and she expressed that there was a lot of fear as a younger student. It was very intimidating to be in a school with such older kids. You're 5 years old and you're with 12-year-olds. It's very intimidating, especially your first few years. She even mentioned that students would avoid certain hallways due to that, which it depends on how we set up the school system. But yeah. And there's also, Dr. Bergstrom and I talked about the gradual increase of freedom through grades K through 12. As you move from the elementary schools to RCI, you get the freedom of having a locker and walking yourself to a majority of your classes, and then to the middle school, where you are not necessarily with your same class the entire time, and then to high school where you have a lot more freedom. Students liked to see the gradual increase of freedom. It allows for students to be able to mature into their new roles, as well as not giving them too much freedom at a young age or too little freedom at such an older age. And it's a big social change for moving the schools into K through 6, or even K through 3 and 4 through 6. You would have to accommodate for a variety of other things, which leads me to my next one, which is like the little things. A lot of students express concerns about bell schedules and lockers. I know that the RCI has bell schedules and lockers, so if we did convert to a K through 6 or a K through 5, we'd have to consider what you would want to do, whether or not K through 5th and 6th graders get lockers, which would create the need for more construction in the other schools while converting them, as well as bell schedules, because I know from being in elementary school and volunteering at my mom's elementary school, they don't have bell schedules. Each grade and each classroom runs on a different schedule, so you'd have to consider whether or not the older students would have a bell schedule and lockers. Also, students expressed that they liked moving. A lot of students said they liked the idea of, moving to a new school. I personally liked it as well. I liked that I kind of followed in the footsteps of my brother. He was always 2 years older than me, so I never was at the same school as him. But I always thought it was fun that you were the youngest for 1 year and then the oldest for the next year. Then the or 5 through 8th grade. And then having our current grade separations makes us special. A lot of students have mentioned in the comments and what they wrote down is that they like our current grade system a lot. It makes us different. I've talked to many people and they're like, especially when I was in RCI, they thought it was the strangest but the coolest thing that we had a K through 6th and that fifth graders weren't at the elementary school anymore. And changing the arrangement of schools would require change in schedules for grades in our current system of increased freedom and responsibility, which is something you have to consider. Kind of as a little thing, you would have to consider what you would want to do with the various age ranges and grades in schools, whether or not you want to allow them to have that same freedom that you do currently. So, yeah. Any questions, concerns, comments? That's all I have for now.
That's really helpful. Because I think, I'm at the point where one of the big factors is the issue of what do we do at the intermediate and middle school level and how big a school do we want? Do you want to go big and what's the factor? So the feedback from the students is a little bit counter to where I was thinking, but it gives me a pause to figure out. I mean, there's going to be that rub. Is the current grade configuration versus size, and which one carries some weight on that?
Just to touch on that, most of the students, or all of the students that I've talked to majority of them have been through our school system, through K through 4, 5 through 6, 7, 8, and then when you come together at 5th grade, and then you're with your class all the way up until high school. So for them to have such a big change, I think, is very different. So maybe they're not to disregard anything of what they're saying, but it's what we're used to. So it's easy to criticize the new systems as we are used to, and we like to stick with what we have.
Can we get a copy? You guys shoot a copy of the PowerPoint to the board members so we've got that for our information? That was really helpful for me. Thanks. You guys still going to talk about this a little bit or wait for a cue from us on further work? Okay, I'll be in touch. Anybody else have anything you want to add or ask Ellen questions? Thanks. All right, Brian, you've got some information for us as well. This is we're kind of filling our plate with facts right now.
Andy's going to pull a few of the items that I have for your review, and just to start with, I'll let you know there are 3 main pieces of the update that I have, and then we are open to any questions that you have. The first update is on Fitchburg enrollment projections, and Steve and I we were having a conversation about the number of students in Fitchburg, and this document that you have in front of you totals just over 700, and it reflects Fitchburg area residents as well as open enrollment students from the north part of our district. So it will include City of Fitchburg, Town of Dunn, Town of Madison, and Burmeister Woods, which is part Oregon School District, part McFarland School District. As I mentioned, it's just over 700 students early childhood through 12th grade. And then Katie put together on the right side, after she put together the list first, it just creates more questions and more questions and more questions. So in my second pass, I asked her could you distribute the Brooklyn, Netherwood, and Prairie View students by grade so we have a sense of how many students are from what I'll call the greater Fitchburg area, which is really Fitchburg, Dunn, Town of Madison, and McFarland. And to no surprise, you'll see Netherwood, our largest school, has the most students from that area. Prairie View is second, and then Brooklyn is third, which makes sense because Brooklyn would be the farthest transportation center. Steve and I were having a conversation then last week, and we concluded it would be really important for the board to know if we were to build a new school, what could the projected enrollment of one of the options being a K-4 school in Fitchburg or a K-6 school in Fitchburg as we roll those numbers out. And you can see in the third block, we've identified 283 students if it was a K-4 building and 410 students if it was a K-6 building in the city of Fitchburg. We have another iteration, and this one might cause you to look cross-eyed at it because it's a lot of information. Andy, would you click on the next item? You're likely going to need some time. This is enrollment projections on our various options. And Steve and I were meeting on Thursday, and he asked me the question, would it be possible for us to make some estimates and apply what it will look like on the 5 options in 2020-21 school year? I will say there is not a scientific process to do this, and Katie and I handed back and forth many sheets that look like this one, just to give you a sense that it's not a simple or pretty process. Janie, would you distribute these? I'm going to keep one to anyone in the audience that would like it. I just want to orient everyone. You all recall this, right? Little head nod. This was the Roffers report and the idea of going green, yellow, and red. So what we attempted to do was put together a very similar format. So you'll notice on the left-hand side it says school, then the first column is actual enrollment. That matches to the T, the 3755. And remember, it's under 4,000 because we don't have any 4K kids in it. Otherwise, we'd be at our 4,000 number we talk about. And we don't have any 4K students in this projection because 4K is the community-based projection, so the children are not in our schools. Then we go to the next column to the right, which is MD Roffer's projection. This brings us to 4,443. Just like in our task force report, it matches to the T. You'll notice when you go across the bottom in option 1A, 1B, option 2, option 3, and option 4, the final tie-out number is the same at 4,443 students. Then Katie worked a little Excel magic and started to distribute students just to give you a sense, and I'll point something out. In option 1, recall the first building to be built is a new 5-6 school. So mathematically, we would take the projection, which is 744, and we arbitrarily, decided we could split that in half. As we talked back and forth, it's always tough to split it in half because you have some efficiencies, and you heard Andy talking about marginal cost and marginal revenue. We're now working on the marginal cost side. It seemed best to have a larger Rome Corners school, which is already functioning, and a smaller second school. Again, we could split it 50-50. This seemed to make most sense. You'll notice by doing that and building a new K-4 school, and thinking that the K-4 school, again, we had to make some assumptions, is likely in Fitchburg, that would have the 281, or I guess we initially said 283, but you'll see all of the elementary schools are in green. Rome Corners, 5-6 were in green, and Oregon Middle School were in yellow, just as in Mark's report. When we go to option B, this is a new K-6 school, And here's the distribution. We're a little higher than the 410 that we had in the previous enrollment on the K-6 students, or K-6 school, again, assuming that that's in Fitchburg. But again, you'll notice we're green elementary. Rome Corners in the middle school, we're still yellow. I guess the positive part is we're no longer red at Rome Corners. Everyone following that logic? Then we go to option 2, and again, a distribution. This was a total reconfiguration with two 4-6 schools. And the moment we were to open 2 4-6 schools, we would already be in yellow. So in that caution area. Option 3 puts us in yellow at our elementary schools, which are roughly 500 students. And the middles, we have Oregon Middle School and a new middle school, which would be smaller than what the current middle schools are, but we stay in the green category. And then in option 4 is the new K-6 school. You'll see we're green in all 4 of our elementary schools, again, assuming a K-6 school is in the Fitchburg area, so we would have 410 students that are already in Fitchburg, and likely we'd have some growth and we'd add some additional students. And then at Rome Corners in the middle school, we are in the yellow zone. And of course, the high school doesn't change in any of these scenarios because we have built some capacity with the 2014 referendum. Then lastly, Katie inserted the building capacity. We didn't put building capacities behind the new schools. I guess we could have. The K-6 elementary school would have a building capacity of 600. So this is a first try, not a final product, on applying our 4,443 students to the various options. And one of the questions that we tried to answer is, if we were to build a new school, how many students would be in that new school under the various scenarios? So I'm going to stop with that. I know Katie has spent a lot of time on this, and a 4 or 5 minute review by me. While I'm an excellent teacher, I know I'm not going to get to every point, and I want to see if you have any questions that I can answer or that we will need to check back with Katie on.
Jeff?
So I'd like Andy to confirm my thought process here. The way I'm kind of looking at this is our K through 4 schools today, for each grade, they have 4 or 5 sections.
In some cases, I think we have 6, but mostly 4 or 5.
Okay. So looking at these numbers as of today, without the growth that's coming the next couple of years in Fitchburg, the number of students currently residing in Fitchburg amounts to about 3 sections worth. And then once you add on the population growth, they'd probably be up to 4 in short order coming from Fitchburg. I'm just looking for confirmation.
I believe.
Okay, so then, looking at option 4 on the sheet that Brian just handed out, if we do the K-6, initially, it might not be filled to the rafters because the growth is going to be coming incrementally. But eventually, if Fitchburg continues to grow as we think it will, it makes all the more sense for that school to be converted from a K-6 to a K-5 because of additional growth from that immediate area.
I think that was the thinking of why we came up with that option.
Okay, thank you.
Which is my point, Brian, is are you able to take this out one step further and do 2025? The point in time when the Roffers report is looking at, with option 3 and 4 conversions, so that we can look at those numbers?
Yes, I think it gets blurry It's a little blurry when we get out to 2025, but we can certainly do it. And Jeff, you put your finger on a point that I was that I thought about this morning, but I didn't make earlier. Basically, the K-6 provides, the K-6 school, again, I'm making assumptions here, the K-6 school in Fitchburg not only would have 421 Fitchburg area kids in it, but it would also provide some relief to Rome Corners. Because remember, Rome Corners, in the initial Roffers and task force study, Rome Corners is red right away, and we have to do something. We cannot physically put 744 kids. So I'm not trying to draw that conclusion for you. You can see it here, but it's one I drew in my mind.
Can I ask a question about the numbers?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first sheet that we got, Brian, I'm not sure if I'm reading it correctly. So if I look on the left-hand side and I add up K through 4, it's 293 students. Just take my word on that. And then we've got 296 in the breakout, which is just the 3 difference, so that's not a big deal. I guess we've got 3 in ECSL and Prairie View, so maybe I guess that's the difference. But then the projected enrollment goes down K4 from 293 to 283, and I don't understand those numbers. Is that 283 in the projected enrollment? Is that 283 more so that our students from Fitchburg would double in 2 years? Or what is that 283 and where does it come from?
This side is actually 217, or 2017, 2018. What this is, you've heard Andy or Katie use the term roll-up. So we take existing grades. That's what I've crossed out here. I actually took the students from kindergarten, moved them down to first grade, moved the first graders to second graders to third graders to fourth, and then I advanced that over for 2 years. So we have some, it shouldn't be a surprise that it's smaller, and here's why it went down from 293 to 283. Students that move into the district typically do not come at kindergarten or 4K. They typically come a little later because families are building their second house or buying their second house and their kids are older. So we will start with smaller kindergarten and first grade classes, and as we roll them up, that's what Katie and I found is in today's numbers they might be higher, but it's all a function of the grades you're bringing forward. And an example of that would be, look at kindergarten. They're at 54. Second grade is at 77. You know, that's quite a gap. 4K is at 41, but remember, we do not receive 100% of the 4K families. We get about 80% of the 4K families because some families decide not to start their kids. So there's a lot of fluctuation in enrollment by grade levels. There's a long answer. I don't know if that was helpful.
So in this projection then, given that, it wouldn't be pressure from Fitchburg in the first 2 years of this that would cause us to need a new primary school in the first 2 years, as long as we're following the projections. The growth then, I'm guessing we're projecting would happen above the 4th grade level for the next 2 years from Fitchburg? Or are we suggesting that enrollment from Fitchburg is actually going to drop as a total number in the next 2 years?
Yeah, I wouldn't draw either one of those conclusions. Katie just worked backwards to the number in Mark Roffer's 4,443. It could be different, and we tried to put a little stake in the ground to say, based on the distribution of elementary enrollments today, here's where we see that rolling up. The one thing I would tell you for sure is 283 on this sheet is wrong. it's going to be different, very likely higher. We just tried to take a snapshot today to give you a sense to answer the question, if you built a school, an elementary school in Fitchburg, how many students would be in it? Because what I heard from board members in some one-on-one conversations is, do you have any idea how many kids would actually be in a school if we built one there? So this was an attempt to illustrate that. Nothing more, not an enrollment projection.
Thanks.
Anybody else with any questions or comments regarding the numbers? Troy, anything? Okay. Good. Brian, anything more on the?
Yeah, the last thing is the communication plan, and I will ask Erica to jump in as well. Andy, could you pull up? Yes. We had a communication meeting last Friday, and what you don't get is every little detail of the calendar. We'd be happy to share that with you, but we think it likely would cause some confusion. What you have in front of you and on that Andy just pulled up on the screen are three main pieces to our feedback and engagement timeline over the next several months. And the first item is in March, we're designing an informational newsletter. And ideally, we're going to go to print and on this newsletter in the beginning of April with the goal of mailing it on the 16th of April to families. We're also in the process of putting together our second bullet point is an informational display. And if some of you have been at the Firefly, you've seen some informational displays on the teen center and on the food pantry. We're thinking of that kind of concept and then getting permission to place them throughout the community. We don't have any businesses signed up yet. We haven't reached out to any businesses because, as you can imagine, the question will be, what's it going to look like? So we're putting together that informational display. The third item that we talked about was focus groups. And we would like to do about 10 focus groups between now and the end of April, perhaps first week in May. And we're thinking of casting that net super wide and putting out a couple of advertisements that if anyone's interested in participating in a focus group, they are welcome to contact me. And Erica and I will put together a focus group of 2 or of 3. Ideally, we'd like to have about 10 participants in a focus group because that just generates the best conversation. At this point, we don't have our focus group questions identified, and we're looking for a pilot focus group that we would like to do before spring break. So Erica and I are working on that, and we hope to have that for you soon. If you, another picture. What I'm handing, oh, great, Andy does have it. This is the non-arrowed version of that with a few dates. Again, whether you're a visual learner or whether you'd rather read the information, it really contains the same background piece. And the last item Andy just told me he doesn't have. Erica did a quick summary today, so please consider this as a draft. This is just population and growth coverage to date, and you'll notice one of the things we always need to lead with is we didn't just start working on this. We've been working on this, and you'll notice the date, 1/13/2017. That's when we established the growth task force, and you look at the number of community touches or articles that were on the Oregon Observer, and you'll notice we received a lot of front page billing in the Oregon Observer. We'll continue to summarize and keep track. This is actually a 2-page document, so there's some information on the back as well. So that's a super quick summary of our communication plan, and Erica and I can respond to any questions that you may have.
I have a question. So at what point in the process are you going to be talking about options? The options that are identified?
During the focus groups,
Okay.
we would share the options. So I should have better articulated that. The focus group would start with a 10-minute presentation and then likely a 40-minute question answer period for them to respond to questions. And the whole notion of, we don't have the informational newsletter done. I think we'll talk in a broad sense about the options. We don't want to talk about the detailed sense of the options in an informational newsletter that goes to 12,000 households, because we could lose people, you know, in that process in detail.
With respect to the informational plan, the feedback engagement, any comments or feedback to Brian, Courtney?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but I guess I would just, again, point out that it would be important to include all parts of the district, not just the Oregon Village. These touch points are all great, but they're all Oregon Observer. There is a publication in Fitchburg, and it would be fabulous to have Fitchburg and Brooklyn and Town of Dunn and all our municipalities represented on these focus groups. And that might mean you might have to reach out a little in a different way, but it would be good to include.
Yeah,
our
ideally,
representation.
we will have an informational display at every voting, if the municipalities would allow us to have one, even though we have nothing on the ballot except for school board election. That's an opportunity to get directly, to have a direct touch point with the various municipalities. I've also had a conversation with Scott, because I don't understand the complete organization of the paper, but the papers are all connected together, and occasionally when I read the Fitchburg Star, I will see Oregon information, and if I have it right, the Fitchburg Star is free and comes out once a month. So I've been, you are appropriately in my ear, and I don't mind you in my ear. And I have been continuing to encourage, you know, let us know what we can do, and maybe when you and I are visiting with the city administrator and their economic development person at the city of Fitchburg, we could talk them into having an informational display in the city of Fitchburg hall as well.
Or library.
Yeah.
Anybody with anything else to share with Brian? Going once, going twice. Thanks, Brian. If you could, I know it's going to be fuzzy, but run those projections out to 2025, because that's important for, you know, consideration of the full range of the options. So we can share that at the next meeting. Okay, 5-year budget plan, we done superintendent report then. Brian, you're up.
Okay, just getting to my next update. School safety. As Andy mentioned, this past week we had the opportunity to meet with Brooklyn Fire Department and Brooklyn Police Department. We tried to get a meeting with the City of Fitchburg Fire and PD, and we have it for this next week. Not this week, but the following week. And we learned something, that our City of Fitchburg Fire Department chief, he came from Oak Creek. So he has quite a bit of experience. If you recall, the Shiite synagogue that had a tragic situation, and we came to learn that he's done some speaking, across the country on safety and security management. So we thoroughly enjoyed the conversation we had with the Brooklyn PD and Brooklyn Fire Department, and they told us that they are working in a consortium with the City of Fitchburg and City of Fitchburg Fire and City of Fitchburg PD. So it feels like we're closing in on a really good collaboration with everyone on that process. Next item is, Ellen already spoke about the Spring Fling Dance. I just wanted to make sure I did not name it the Spring Fling Dance. I know that's a creative little phrase for the dance, and we were very busy at Oregon High School this Saturday. In the afternoon, we had between 1,500 and 1,600 attending a sectional tournament. I think it was Division 5 between Platteville and Edgerton, and I received a few emails from Edgerton families, perhaps because they won and they were super happy, but they were exceedingly complimentary of our Oregon staff and how we ran that WIA event. And then on Saturday night, Sun Prairie and Madison East High School played, and it was our second sellout. Our first sellout was graduation last year, and we had close to 2,200 people plus minus at the basketball game on Saturday evening. You heard some information on parent-teacher conferences. Last week we were at Netherwood and RCI, and I know this week we're high school. And Dawn, we have Prairie View next week, and Brooklyn this week. And our last major item, I've communicated to you about the March 14th student walkouts that are occurring on a national basis, and it's focused around a 17 minutes in remembrance of the victims in Parkland. And I also shared an update that at noon that day, students in the Madison Metropolitan School District have planned a march from their school on East Washington to the Capitol. We've sent information out today to all of our school staff on that issue. We've also sent information out to parents. I've received about a dozen calls from parents today, and the individuals that called me today wanted to make sure that their children are not required to participate in the walkout. And the conversation that I had with all of the parents is, based on our board policy, we are neutral on those activities. We know the activities are going to occur. I spent Friday around lunchtime meeting with the Dane County superintendents, and virtually everyone in Dane County is using the same plan that we are using. If parents want to call in their child to participate in a walkout and have an excused absence, they can excuse them from school. At the elementary level, or I'll say at the K-6 level, if a student's going to be involved in a student walkout, the parents would need to come to school to participate in that activity. We've had very little conversation K-6 about it. Middle school and high school, to our knowledge, and talking with our student leaders, both schools are planning student walkouts. I'm not sure how many of our students would ultimately end up at Madison East. I can tell you that the city of Madison is planning for a rather big event on Wednesday at noon. They're looking at close to 3,000 high school students from across the state that they expect to be at Madison East and walking to the Capitol. Again, we tried to lay out our board policies, which include policy 358, policy 771, and then an information to our school staff, our handbook policy 214, and or 2.14. I'll just read a couple of summary pieces from my information to all staff. The Oregon School District takes a neutral position on political or controversial topics. As a public school district, we need to maintain a safe and respectful environment for the discussion of different ideas and opinions. So it should come as no surprise to you as well as to our school staff and our students and our parents. Our goal is to have a safe day in school on Wednesday. We will do our best to make sure that we have a safe day, and if students decide to participate in the student walkout or later at the 12 o'clock march in the city of Madison, they're welcome to do so, and if their parents call them in, they'll be excused. If their parents do not call them in, it will be an unexcused absence. So I'll stop and see if you have any questions or want to share some information that perhaps I haven't shared, that or information that's inconsistent with what I have shared so far. I'd also say the principals feel like we are totally on top of this and all set for Wednesday. That concludes my report unless you have questions.
That takes us to future agenda, and the major item, we'll have two items on there of significance, would one of them being, and this is our April meeting, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because we're not going to do one at our spring break. We're not meeting until April.
Can I back up for 1 second?
You can back up.
I also had a conversation with Steve last week, and I intended to say that our plan for staffing, to address Dan's question in terms of, well, with all these students coming, what's it going to look like staffing-wise, and what are we going to do in terms of allocating staff to make sure that we have appropriate class sizes? I talked to Steve, and our plan, Gina will be leading us through our administrative recommendation on staffing at the first board meeting in April, just like last year, where we share everything, get the report out to you. We're not going to ask for action that night. We want to get your questions and ideas, and of course in the interim you're welcome to get questions to Steve or to me, and then we'll be seeking board action on the staffing plan for the 18-19 school year at our second meeting in April. So that's a short look forward in terms of that's a big policy decision that you all get to make every year, is our staffing plan.
Okay, so that'll be one item on the April 1st meeting in April, and the second will bring another workshop with respect to student growth and probably some more data related to school size for 2025. Is there any board member who has anything they want to place on the agenda at that meeting? Okay, so we'll have something from policy. That'll be Mr. Raymond's last meeting. So we'll try to make it short so that we can have celebration time afterwards too. Let's say goodbye to Jeff. Okay, that takes us to checkout before we go into closed session. Barb, anything for checkout? Ellen, thanks for the great reports tonight. Anything additional you want to add tonight? Okay, have a great spring break. Yeah. Krista. Courtney? Jeff?
Just quickly, Ellen already mentioned Oregon mock trial team got back to state again this year, and the regional competition was about a month ago. It was the first week of February, and the previous years they've competed in Janesville, and this year they were moved to the Madison regional, and there was a little bit of anxiety amongst the team because they've gotten to state like 6 or 7 years in a row. And whether it's true or not, I think there are more teams in the Madison regional, and perceived that the competition was a little more difficult. But they made it. They got back to state. And I'd like to thank Mr. Towns for being the coach. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And it's a great activity for the kids. They have to learn how to think on their feet. And we have a number of lawyers in the room, so they know what I'm talking about. Public speaking skills, being a member of a team, it's just a great experience. So congratulations and thanks to Mr. Towns.
Yeah, when I was coaching, we managed to stay out of Madison. We did everything we could to stay out of there and go down to Janesville. So that the fact that they made it to state coming out of Madison is significant. And Mr. Towns does a great job with the program. I think Tim Edwards donates a lot of his time too to help with that. So, Dan, anything?
Yeah, I remember I was on the mock trial team back when I was in high school, and it was a great experience. So yeah, I echo that. Congratulations. It's a lot of fun and a great challenge, and it's not this type of stuff that you would learn necessarily in a classroom, but it is stuff that you use every day, or at least very often after high school. Being able to make arguments and analyze data and try to convince is really good. I just wanted to say about the walkout. I don't know a whole lot about that, and it's a very interesting topic, and it is certainly a moment in history that affects many people, especially high schoolers around the country. It seems to be on fire right now. It's a topic, and I do applaud the administration for getting out ahead of this and making a statement about how we will treat it. And it's up to the individual family as to whether or not people will participate, and I think that's the way it should be. So kudos, and to the high school students and maybe even the middle school students. It's a time in history that you're going to be looking back at, wondering whether, this is something that you should be or should not be involved in.
Thanks, Dan. Brian, I'd like to echo, some thoughts about the sectional basketball games. I think we did 3 of them, Mike. Yeah, and there are cars all over from people from out of town. I heard nothing but praise and compliment, not only for the facility and people wowed by what we've done here, but also about how well organized they were. And so thank you. I know takes a lot of time. The Saturday night was just insane. Yeah, it really showed off our school district and our community well, so that was great. I hope we keep doing that and making the WI aware of the fact that we would be willing to host those things. And along that line, we get. I'm not a big fan of those school report cards, as you know. I don't think they measure how good a district does in a lot of areas, other than just reading and math, which are important. But we heard from our kids about how important co-curriculars are, and we're really active in the co-curricular area. We heard tonight a number of reports on that, the Final Forte, the mock trial, the DECA stuff. I know FFA's been really out there doing a lot of stuff regionally and nationally with Jillian Beatty and her work. Mike Winter, sports coaches, those programs are all done. If you would express on behalf of the board our thanks to the service that they provide to our students. I mean, the compensation level doesn't begin to match the hours that they put in. So if you could let them know that the board thanks them. Drama, we had a play recently with Katie Monk, and solo and ensemble. We hosted solo and ensemble on Saturday with Jen Yancey and the music group. We're involved in organizing that. Brooklyn had a musical that they put on with the Wizard of Oz with 60 fourth graders, 60 to 70. And so Caitlin and Rochelle Hallinan, did a lot of time. That was pretty cool. So we're doing a lot of cool things in this district educationally, and our buildings are used all the time. You go by this building on the weekend, it is always used, and that's what it should be. So we're going to take 5 minutes, board members, and we'll reconvene in the side room and go into closed session for our final session with Brian's evaluation for this year. We will not be coming back into open session. We'll adjourn in closed session. So that'll be the end of our video portion. Everyone have a good spring break, and we'll see you in April.